social inclusion and safety. As a resident of the downtown east side and with the support of the Union Gospel Missions Board, she has recently committed her time and her career to facilitating greater discussion and coordinated action among service providers, government, advocates, funders, and community members in an effort to initiate social innovation, develop strong intentional partnerships, encourage a greater sense of urgency, and ultimately greater outcomes for our city's most vulnerable. Please welcome Genesa Greening.
So now that I sound accomplished, I will admit that I was born and raised in Newfoundland. I was very fortunate, actually, to have had the opportunity to grow up in communities that were smaller than the people represented in this room. I was able to come to realize three very important things: faith, family, and friends. And I took that with me also as a result of the passion of my parents. My mom and dad decided to go into Salvation Army Seminary when I was 7 years old. And as a result, I learned a couple of important things. One of them is my mother was an ordained pastor, as was my father, so I learned how important it was to realize that I was capable of doing whatever I wanted to, but also how important it was to be compassionate. And then I went all the way from Newfoundland to Vancouver 3 weeks after I turned 17. What you have to understand is I left a very white place and came to a very place that, well, there wasn't quite as many people who talked like me. There certainly was a far more higher amount of diversity, which I came to appreciate incredibly quickly. But I also came to appreciate the fact that this community had a place that a lot of people were struggling with some significant devastation. And I ended up starting to work in the downtown east side almost 16 years ago. I helped raise the money for Belkin House for the Salvation Army. And then I eventually moved on to other endeavors, and I now find myself back at Union Gospel Mission. And for those of you who've heard of Union Gospel Mission, you know us for our meal program and for our shelters. And as you can see, we do a good job with the number of people and the meals that we serve. But we're about a far more than that. We are about providing an opportunity for people to experience dignity in community. And for a lot of us, we see lineups on the downtown east side. We see people who are standing, waiting for meals, waiting for shelter, waiting for what a lot of us do not actually comprehend as anything more than bare necessity. But the reality is a lot of these people struggle to get through the day, and a lot of them mostly because they actually struggle with mental illness and addiction. And one of the things that I'm incredibly proud to say at Union Gospel Mission is of the men that come in and successfully complete our program, 74% are clean and sober a year after the completion of that program. Considering over 80% of those who come into our program come in through our emergency shelter, I can tell you how great it is to be able to work somewhere where we don't believe that people are not capable of something more. We don't believe that they deserve to live in devastation or to live in continued trauma, but they actually have the opportunity to regain their dignity. But one of the things that I'm the most excited about right now is the fact that Union Gospel Mission has given me the opportunity to expand things past our doors and to do something that I think needs to happen more and more in our community, and that is to be determined to transform the community and not to just be an advocate for Union Gospel Mission, not to just be an advocate for our programs or for someone else's programs, but to be an advocate for Mary and for the experiences that she's having. And so I've now been given the opportunity to try and have as many conversations as I can, and I'm from Newfoundland, so I can talk. I have no problems with that. But I think that there's not enough talking happening in our neighborhood. I think there's a lot of finger pointing, and I think that there's a lot of us and there's a lot of them. But the challenge is the people who actually end up being put aside are the ones that we're there to serve when we forget that we're actually supposed to be aiming for the same thing, which is the fact that these people have the right to housing, they have the right to recovery, they have the right to be safe and to be free of violence, they have the right to be fed. They don't need us to be arguing on their behalf and forgetting to actually execute the work that we exist to execute. We have another significant issue on the downtown east side, and that's the fact that we have more and more women who are finding themselves marginalized in our neighborhoods.
Currently, right now, we're continuing to see an increase in the number of women who are actually experiencing homelessness, which often leads to very unsafe situations. We have a disproportionate representation of First Nations persons in our neighborhood. We have a disproportionate representation of women who are active in sex work. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to drive at a late hour down Powell or Cordova, but what you may or may not understand is that as a result of the drug use that takes place in our neighborhood, and as a result of significant trauma that a lot of these women experience in their youth, they end up starting to participate in illegal drug activity, and as a result of that, they find themselves in pretty stricken circumstances. We have more drug use happening per capita in the 8 blocks around where I live and work than anywhere else in Canada. The saddest part of that is the majority of the women that live in our neighborhood have children or have had children and have lost them to the system. So we're not just talking about people that are active in addiction, we're talking about children who've lost families. We have over 1,000 sex trade workers within an 8-block radius of Union Gospel Mission. At times, that number is as high as 2,000. 70% of them have had 1 or more children. So if you're wondering if we're going to have a homeless problem in the next 20 years, if we don't start realizing that these women need to be given the opportunity to keep their children, you'll know that we have already actually started to set it up for the next generation. The thing that for me is the most tragic is the number and the age of the women that end up in sex work in Vancouver. And the age is sometimes as young as 14 and younger. Honestly, there is nothing that can make you more incensed in working in the downtown east side than when you see a pregnant teenage girl getting picked up on the corner by a man with a baby on board sign on his minivan. But with all of that said, I actually believe that if we start having conversations between our agencies, between our governments, with the people that are in our neighborhood, like Brandon, who I consider a part of our neighborhood, that we'll continue to see things change. I do this because I just don't find it to be acceptable. I do this because I find that every single person in the downtown east side has a story, and they have the ability to do so much more than sometimes what we even can believe or imagine. But only if we actually start having conversations about changing how we provide services, how we can work together, how we can change our perspectives on homelessness, and how we can start empowering women like we've learned to do in third world countries so that they can actually get their education, keep their children, regain their dignity, become clean and sober, and have the affordable housing that they deserve. And I'm incredibly blessed to call a lot of these women my friends, and I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to tell you about that this evening.